Hoka mai ka la'i kumu ka hila ea, a velo wana I le hua la ea. He vai aloha kamakani la ea, o Hawaiʻi loa ke ala hula la ea. I ʻAulani ke kuʻina, I ʻAulani ku. Aloha ke akua, na akua, na aumakua, a me na kupuna. Mai Hawaiʻi nui a kea, a hiki I ka ʻaina, kupuna, o na lahui, Squamish, Musqueam, a me Tsleil-Waututh. Aloha. With recognition to our gods, to our guardians, and our ancestors, from the expanse of the Hawaiian archipelago to the ancestral lands of our host nations, greetings to all of your ancestors who have welcomed us all here so very warmly. Vilina mai kako, a me ke aloha, and greetings to each and every one of you, with gratitude to our collective ancestors who have allowed us to be here together today. That song, that mele that I shared, references a waterway, a particular waterway, Hawaiʻi loa, the channel between the islands. Oh, I have slides, excuse me. The channel between the islands of Nihoa and Mokumanamana, between the realm of the living, or Ao in yellow, to the north, to the realm of Po, where our area of origin, to the north, where we will return again. This mele recognizes that connectivity, spiritual and physical, that we have with all things. I like it because it recognizes our entire Hawaiian archipelago. We have lots of songs that talk about the connectivity of the ocean, but this one really talks about where the sun rises in the east, maybe this is east, I think, and it sets at Kumukahi, and it sets in the west at Aulani Ku, this at the edge of this subsiding atoll at the very end of our Hawaiian universe. It also speaks of the alahula, or frequented pathways of our ancestors, those pathways that we need to revisit because they served us well and they need to serve us again. Not a great singer, I was supposed to sing it 3 times, so I thought I'd spare you, but I felt compelled to share something from our home islands, and I see some beautiful Hawaiian members of my community here, mahalo. I felt compelled to share it really as a small means of reciprocity, right? The generous sharing of the songs, of the dances, of the stories have been incredible, both yesterday, I wouldn't call that day 0, that was day incredible, and this morning. It's really, truly wonderful to be here today. So mahalo nui to the government of Canada, to the sponsors, to the organizers, everyone who's worked so hard for the past 6 years and beyond to really bring this conference, this Congress to us. Really, it's an honor to be here. As sadly Christina referenced, I have spent nearly half my life in conservation. I've been involved in advocacy and public outreach and management in science, in indigenous knowledge and community engagement, policy making. But I gotta admit, if you can tell, I've found finding the words today a little bit of a struggle. How do you talk about all that? How do you put that all? How do you make that relevant kind of today? And so I just want to say that, I know there's a bio in there, and but I come here not as the Senior Vice President for Oceans at Conservation International, or as a representative of the White House, where I'm currently serving in the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Really, I come as a former manager, right? As someone who helped work with my community to lead and protect an extraordinary place on the planet, one of the world's largest marine protected areas in the world. But before that, I come to you as a Native Hawaiian, as a mother, right, as a descendant of the ocean and ocean-faring people, and as a future ancestor. I mean, we all are future ancestors, right? And the decisions and actions that we take each and every day will determine how we will be considered by future generations. So please know that these thoughts that I share with you today are entirely my own. and it is with deep aloha that I share them with you in hopes that they're worthy of your time. So it's been a different gathering, right? How could it not be? This community, it's been 6 years since we've come together as a marine conservation or marine protected area community, and so much in the world has changed. You know, Ruth really very detailed, provided an example of what's changed in South Africa. The community, our community has grown and changed, right? Knowledge has grown, and expectations of what needs to be done has also grown, right? The bar has been lifted. And I've really been thinking a lot about that. I've been to many ocean conferences, including previous impacts, and it's clear to me that this is a very different gathering. I mean, how could it not be, right? Never before has humanity faced such an overwhelming confluence of crises, namely climate, biodiversity loss, and widespread injustice and inequity. No sector, no country, no forest, no coast, no waterway, no community, no family remains untouched by these incredible forces. All the while, the world is emerging out of the continuing impacts of COVID, which impacts and has impacted our families, our livelihoods, our economies, and the ways, quite frankly, that we relate to one another. It's changed that. We hoped that through the struggles and tragedies, right, that those vulnerabilities of supply chain, of so many things, right, food, healthcare, education, transportation, commerce, would create a jolt, an awakening within our societies about really how we relate to nature and each other. That needed to change because it wasn't working, right? We thought they served us, but they really never did. We have collective exhaustion. The planet is on fire, countries are at war, scarcity is widespread, the stakes are higher, and the margin of error is narrowing. You all feel that, right? Yeah. So what does that have to do with conservation? With a growing global marine MPA network? Like everything. Because the work we do, like Ruth pointed out, is happening in this context, right? In this reality. The ocean has borne a major brunt of those impacts, but it's also, as was mentioned yesterday, a source of solutions for combating them. And we have to walk that balance, right? Recognizing the impact and also trying to be smart about how the ocean can continue to provide what we need. To move forward, to create massive transformation in the way the world thinks about, relates to, and then treats the ocean, requires us to understand the social, cultural, economic, and political conditions around us. We need to lead with empathy, compassion, curiosity, and openness, recognizing that so many things are hanging in the balance all at once, right? Openness, no more judgment, no more thinking we have the answers, because if we did, we'd have solved this already, and we haven't. This is what makes the work that you are doing so very important and necessary, not only for your communities and respective countries, but for the planet. And your hard work to protect your community, nature, is incredibly generous, particularly given all these profound pressures on society and your communities that we're facing today. This is also a different gathering because the composition who's here is really different than in the past, right? One where Indigenous peoples and those on the very front lines of conservation are more present than ever, and they need to become even more present, right? Participating in yesterday's Indigenous caucus and now standing here looking out at who is in this room, I have to admit, it's pretty emotional. This is really different than how I've spent most of my career. It's been a lonely place. But we still have a long way to go, right? It's taken a while to develop this trust, to be together, and our collective journey is far from over. But your presence here and your leadership in your communities, in your sectors, and as keepers of tradition, right? It gives me and fuels my hope. But hope is not a strategy. So we must make the most out of our time today, pull together all of our skills, our knowledge, our financial and human assets, the lessons we have learned, and honestly reflect and assess on where we are, and then craft the best possible and boldest solutions, strategies to care for our global ocean so it can continue to regenerate and in return care for us. Every day we wait, oops, I don't know why that did that. Every day we wait, the job gets harder. You are here because unlike most, you know we live on an ocean planet, you know it's the source of life on the planet, you know its health has a major impact, in fact, totally impact on our health. You know that its decline is a driving force behind climate change and that humanity is acutely experiencing right now, and you understand that if we want to stabilize the planet, we simply have to stabilize the ocean. And marine protected areas, just to use that for short, but you know we're talking about area-based conservation, place-based conservation, all of those things, right? I'm not gonna get hung up on the word or the title. It's caring for places, and that's what oceans are. It's a series of places, just like on land, right? They're just underwater, but they're places. So we're probably also, if you agree with all those things I just said, you probably agree that no economic, agricultural, educational, human welfare, poverty, or even technological solution that is being proposed today will address those incredible challenges if the ocean dies. Full stop. Therefore, you probably also agree that as such, we may want to change our spherical view of the planet. I'm not saying we're a flat earther, I'm not saying that, but we have to change the way we think about the planet and take a different, much more ocean-centric view, right, of the world. An ocean-centric view of the world if we want transformation to become a reality. And part of that transformation is the recognition that building a global MPA network is not about connecting places, it is about connecting people. Also, full stop. MPAs are a human construct. Our management is not for nature, it is for ourselves. And MPAs are not going to be successful, nor durable without the care and engagement of people. And for people to engage right, there needs to be reciprocity. There needs to be co-benefits. We use those terms now, direct and indirect, from the work, from the ocean, and from this sector. Yet, even though we know that, we don't often match that truth, right? That truth that this is about people with investment in making this happen. We prioritize lots of other management needs, like science, monitoring, enforcement, restoration, regulatory frameworks, permitting systems to track and manage human use. And those are all important, right? They're not bad, and we don't have a lot of resources. But rarely is community engagement, real, true, respectful community engagement, prioritized and funded at the levels commensurate to its incredibly essential value. This is where you reap the benefits by investing in your communities and in people. I've spent the last 25 years, hate to admit it, working at the intersection of community, culture, conservation, science, and policymaking. The intersection of all that stuff, right? This work has helped to shape the field of large-scale marine protected areas, built largely on the work to protect this very extraordinary place that we now call Papahānaumokuākea. When I started my career, there was no such thing as a large-scale ocean conservation. There were about 4,500 marine protected areas in the world, protecting less than 1% of the ocean. When Papahānaumokuākea was first designated as a coral reef reserve back in 2000, 22 years ago in December, its sheer size was an anomaly, a first of its kind. Only the Great Barrier Reef was protected at this kind of scale. But as I understand it, the driving purposes for protecting the Great Barrier Reef were not to protect a large swath of ocean, but to rather protect the natural heritage of this extraordinary reef that you could see from space as a wondrous World Heritage Site, well deserved. For me, what started as an exciting opportunity to be part of a first ever coral reef expedition, right? We were literally the first people that many of these animals had ever seen, right? It became a request by elders in my community to lead Hawaii's effort to protect the majority of the longest archipelago on the planet. Most everyone expected our efforts to fail. Instead, it ignited a whole new genre of marine conservation. Its success and subsequent expansion efforts enabled Papahānaumokuākea, like you can see on this screen, to be expanded, quadrupled. It is now 3.5 times the size of California. This effort was first led by Native Hawaiian fishermen like Uncle Buzzy here on the top right corner, and supported by other cultural experts, scholars, scientists, and community leaders. What I call an uneasy alliance formed with wildlife advocates, conservation scientists, who had also dedicated their lives to saving endangered species like the critically endangered Hawaiian monk seal, sea turtles. You know, many people take credit for Papahānaumokuākea, and admittedly, there's lots of credit to go around, and it's a big place. But what's most important now is that the love for this place has only grown. We have local, national, and now a growing international community of caretakers and advocates, which now crosses several generations. Papahānaumokuākea's establishment challenged conventional drivers of MPA design, like settling human conflicts, curbing fishing, or limiting impacts of shipping or vessel traffic, right? All those things that MPAs were initially kind of designed to do, to kind of get in the middle and negotiate that. So it really pushed the boundaries on ocean governance. You know, we're frustrated by that because people would ask us, they don't understand what we're doing. They're like, but it's nearly pristine. What are you protecting it from? But that was entirely the wrong question. It's what are we protecting it for? Our community was protecting it for its intrinsic, tangible and intangible heritage value, both cultural and natural. Because for us, those are the same. To honor this ancestral realm and to ensure it would be a place of regeneration for the future. That's being for something. Leadership and assertion of this millennial-old connection to this place enabled us to become the first marine UNESCO World Heritage Site inscribed as both a mixed natural and cultural seascape. Papahānaumokuākea changed my life, and it changed the lives of many, some of whom are in this room today, right? We have taken the lessons into fields of education, policy, science, law, local conservation efforts in the islands where we live. It's inspired so many things. Early on, the team asked each other, well, what will success look like in 20 years? You know, we didn't offer scientific thresholds. We didn't say, you know, what percentage of a species was going to recover. Those weren't the things we were focused on, right? We said things like, well, traditional deep sea voyaging canoes would voyage again. That on the 6 o'clock news, when the weather said what the weather is like, they're going to include Papahānaumokuākea, right? University courses would be taught, students would grow and be adept in both culture and science using Papahānaumokuākea as a classroom. Children would know that instead of 8 Hawaiian islands, there are 132 islands, atolls, shoals, reefs, submerged banks, and seamounts, right? And that management would be guided through a cultural lens. Cultural ceremony would take place again, new songs and chants would be written, dances choreographed about this place. And instead of a $25,000 fine for possession of a threatened species, cultural practitioners would be able to utilize bones and feathers of deceased species like this glorious Laysan albatross to continue our cultural practices and perpetuation of knowledge. These things have all now happened, along with many, many more, using conservation lens. And using a conservation lens, right, the global impacts of climate change, our management science program have also seen successes. With nearly any metric you use, Papahānaumokuākea has been a success, but it didn't lead with those scientific metrics. It led with its purpose and its connection and its importance to people, our community, and future generations. And although Papahānaumokuākea was never specifically designed for spillover effect, listen to that, never specifically designed to achieve spillover effect. A recent study found that catch rates outside the boundaries have significantly increased rates for catch rates of yellowfin and big-eye tuna. Never the purpose. So by all accounts, the benefits and value of Papahānaumokuākea has been tremendous. And I'm not up here saying this to brag. This is why we do this work. This is what is possible. Establishment of Papahānaumokuākea also kicked off a series of additional large-scale remote protection, like in the US Pacific remote islands shown here, the Chagos Archipelago, Motumotiro Hiva or Sala y Gomez off the coast of Chile, all places with limited and no populations, but not without cultural histories and ongoing connections with people, and that's important. There's no place on this planet that doesn't have a connection to people, do not be mistaken. Mapped together, large-scale MPAs were starting to have an impact on global marine protection. Born from this movement was Big Ocean, a network of the world's large-scale marine managers. We intentionally used the term management instead of protected area, so we didn't get into that argument, but also because this was a network of managers for managers. The network facilitated learning exchanges between communities in support of efforts like that in the Juan Fernandez Islands, a community of lobster fishers who created a marine park to protect their livelihoods and their ways of life. And cultural exchanges in the Pacific to support indigenous-led conservation and co-management. So places like Rapa Nui or Easter Island, the community could help combat the consumption pressures on their marine environment from their growing tourism industry and growing population by utilizing science and traditional management techniques, regaining knowledge and respect for cultural and indigenous epistemologies. As the new kid on the conservation block at that time, right, we learned also from existing networks, like the extraordinary work happening across the Indo-Pacific by the burgeoning LMMA network, which combined now with the efforts of Blue Ventures has now extended into the Western Indian Ocean, where communities, like here in the Solomon Islands, intimately engage in designing and implementing their own ocean use systems that make sense for what they need. And on the other side of the Pacific, efforts dating back to the 70s, a network of sites generated support for making MPAs a core component of sustainable development there, and to address their own unique sets of user conflicts. Human networks are as old as time. Some have been around for millennia, keeping communities connected. They exist all over the world in places like Brazil, the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, Indonesia. And I just learned yesterday about a network in Mexico that celebrated 25 years yesterday, right on. The Micronesia Challenge, an effort launched in 2006, built on a national effort already taking place in Palau, inspired the development of more conservation in Micronesia. That inspired other challenges like in the Caribbean. And other networks like the Global Island Partnership or GLISPA formed to address specific challenges relating to the vulnerability of islands. Networks of community-based rangers in the Bird's Head Seascape in West Papua continue to build capacity locally of community-based and locally managed areas. And networks of educational MPAs are turning the oceans into classrooms, innovating how both conservation and education are delivered. And networks of scientists are creating research agendas, sharing research, and co-authoring necessary science to help support the field of MPA management. And networks of funders like Oceans 5, the Blue Prosperity Initiative, and the Blue Action Fund are increasing philanthropic investment in this field. Hybrid efforts like the Blue Nature Alliance provide both funding and capacity building efforts as partners in delivering conservation results in places like the Laos Seascape in Fiji, in the Western Indian Ocean, and in New Caledonia. Through the work being done in these communities, science confirms, right, that when the oceans are cared for, marine life thrives, and improvements to the health of oceans and people in communities are measurable. Well, and that's true. And from a local knowledge standpoint, like, that's obvious, right? And you see the wealth when you're able to pull it out of the ocean. making area-based conservation efforts like MPAs critical, like I said before, to ocean health. These efforts are evidence of that. And I share this history and genealogy not as a walk down memory lane, although it is fun, but because in order to know where we need to go, we need to know where we came from. And we also need to know that we're not alone. There's incredible things happening all over the world. And there's now a global call to protect 30 by 30 of the world's oceans by 2030. The premise, right, that protecting enough ocean area so nature can function is important. And in that drive, let's also make sure that what we protect is as well managed as possible and also done in a way, right, that doesn't impact communities and put pressure where they are not ready for that movement, right? Importantly, though, let's not let 30% be a blind drive, right? It can't be forced upon communities or countries, especially because we don't want to drive further inequity, and we know conservation has that history, right? And we can't perpetuate that. But we have to remember that 30% is not the point. Yes, I said that. 30% is not the point. It is not an end goal, right? It's simply a target. It's an important lever, a driver, and a means of garnering global consensus. But let's not fool ourselves. There's nothing magical about that number. Sorry if that offends anyone. Because when the globe reaches 30%, right, the oceans aren't magically going to be healed. The climate's not going to immediately cool. We're not going to offset the impacts of illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. The reality is we need to care for 100% of the ocean. Right? We need to change our relationship, the relationship of humanity that we have with the ocean. That's the point. So we can get out of this crazy loop that where we think ocean choices are binary, right? Fish the heck out of over here and then put a big fence over here. I'll just leave that there. But it doesn't mean that this target isn't important, right? It totally is. It's necessary to achieve. There's strong scientific consensus about it, and there's growing political consensus, right? So we need to use that as levers, right? People are starting to agree. And that consensus allows us to be able to do the work we need to do at international, national, local, and family community levels. So for anybody who's heard me talk about 30%, you know I couldn't do this without talking about math, right? So what exactly is 30%? Let's talk about that. The ocean's roughly 363 million square kilometers. It's so big that all the land masses on the planet can fit within the Pacific Ocean alone. Yes, I'm Pacific-centric. And there's still plenty of room to swim around. 30% is 109 million square kilometers. Our first goal is 10%. So if you compare that to land, because I speak in those kinds of units of measure, it's Africa and Australia put together. That's what 10% is, right? The World Database on Protected Areas say that we're roughly around 8%, 8.16% or something, as on the website yesterday, okay? And that's, that we don't all agree that that's the same, that on that same number, but let's just say, like, at best, right, that's what we've achieved. That means the gap we have to fill is 79 million square kilometers of ocean. Like, that's 3 Africas plus 3 Australias, right? Or if you speak if you're from the northern hemisphere in Europe, that's 5 Russias, right? Or if you speak MPA, that's 53 more Papahānaumokuākeas, or 231 more Great Barrier Reefs, or 573 more Galapagoses. I know that's not a real word. In order to get, let that sink in. Right, all these things we talked about have been awesome, right? Super necessary. We were at 1% when I started this 25 years ago. But to get there, we need to scale our solutions, both in relative size and in replication. We need to have more courage, and we need to share this problem, right? We need to share the creation of knowing and developing and creating the solutions, right? This is not a conservation problem. It is a humanity problem. The good news is we know how to design them, right? Technically, that's where conservation can come in. But there's always more lessons to learn and more capacity to build. But those mechanisms, those key things are known. The other good news is there's so much that's transferable to what we've learned from large-scale MPAs and other efforts that it has direct relevance to the high seas. Really important time, as Minna said, for BB&J negotiations, right? There's functionally little difference. I know policy-wise it's different, but functionally, to take care of these places, we know how to do it, and that should make us courageous and bold. These experiences can help rally that global community to say, hey, this is possible. It's not a crazy idea. There's no difference between this remote coral reef and the remote coral reefs in Papahānaumokuākea, except a political line. Except a political line. Partnerships like the Deep Sea Coalition, the High Seas Alliance, and the Coral Reefs of the High Seas Coalition have been established to share these experiences and technical knowledge, so they're there for us. And other good news is that Indigenous peoples and local communities have been doing place-based guardianship for millennia, and the results are clear. It is estimated that Indigenous people and long-standing place-based communities manage or have tenure rights over 24% of the land on the planet, which contain 40% of the ecologically intact landscapes and protected areas left on the planet, and a staggering 80% of the world's biodiversity. In short, it's clear that globally, the best of what's left on the planet rests in the hands of people who remain closest to nature. If we were a bank, you would invest there, wouldn't you? That sounds like really smart risk reduction. A similar calculation has not been done for the ocean. The way ocean governance is structured, as we know, is not as quite straightforward. But given the commitments Indigenous peoples and local communities like my own have made in the past 2 decades to protect the ocean and to reassert culturally based management approaches, there's so much opportunity to improve the way we collectively care for the ocean fairly and equitably through Indigenous-led conservation. The foundation for successful protection is being clear about what you're trying to protect and why. It's also important to be clear about for whom. Guided by this clarity, area-based conservation efforts should be designed to be fit for purpose. Not all MPAs are created for the same purpose, and their effectiveness should therefore be measured accordingly. Matching the design of MPAs to their desired purpose is where things get complicated, right? Not scientifically. You can look at what you're trying to do and then figure out the science to make that happen, but socially. And this is where political courage has to come in, so that compromise doesn't result in paper parks, or worse. That's another topic for a talk. What's worse than a paper park? Polarization, right? To minimize this kind of pressure, we need to close the divide between fisheries management and place-based protections. Both are needed. Neither are sufficient. We can't let our field fall victim to fake news and purposeful manipulation of the narrative. We have to find commonalities, and we have to work through these issues and differences. Work through them. The stakes are too high to allow further polarization. When we set out to create MPAs, we intend them to be established forever, into perpetuity. People, forever is a really, really, really long time. When we look across the horizon, right, an average person can see only about 5 kilometers. And yet we believe we can see a whole lot further. Similarly, when we think about forever and we think, oh, we know this management thing to do today, we look out on the horizon and we think that we have the answer for the future. And we don't, right? We don't take that forever part seriously. We say it, but we don't do it. And what that happens when we design something like that, it has major implications for daily, day-to-day management. It paralyzes people on the ground when we limit and we don't build in the opportunity to innovate, to change, and to be fluid like the ocean. We have to do our best to see not only the immediate need and anticipate the needs, the threats, and we need people like Ruth, the next generation. We need to get off this stage. Like what we know and what we think was relevant and super important, and hopefully it's still a bit relevant at this moment. But we need to know that we have to design for something we can't even see. Place-based conservation is a journey, one that has ups and downs, highs and lows, forwards and backwards movement, and therefore requires kind of intergenerational perspectives. To be successful, it needs the support of people across all sectors, disciplines, political perspectives, and generations, and people who don't agree with us. because we need a collective commitment to care. It's also important to remember that things are cyclical. That means the work is never done. Sorry, it is never done. Just when we bring communities in, they change. Young people grow up. Political and government officials cycle in and cycle out, and you gotta teach them all over again, right? National and global shifts like a pandemic or a change in government can create unforeseen challenges. And then we have to kind of start again a little bit. And another quick word on equity. Equitable decision-making is super important, as everybody's mentioned in this conference. But equity doesn't start with just the decision, right? Principles of equity and justice have to be applied in all aspects of our work, in how we design and carry out science, in how we collect, utilize, and store data, information, and knowledge, in how we design and implement education programs, in the skills we look for and value when we hire, in the design and setup and day-to-day management and implementation of a site. And more importantly, whatever we do, benefits derived from an MPA need to be equitably shared. To reach global targets, we need to be creative about how we deliver and design community-specific solutions, like connecting surf breaks with increasing tourism to conservation and economic development. That's what's happening in places like Indonesia through efforts of the Surf Conservation Partnership and other places in the world through the Save the Waves Coalition. Most of these efforts, like for us at Papahānaumokuākea, did not set out to change the world. The efforts were set out to care for a very beautiful and wonderful place, right? But in the end, right, that's what happened. When you set out to take care of a very beautiful and special place, that's what happens. So whatever you're doing in the Great Bear Sea, the Arctic, the Mediterranean, Gabon, Seychelles, Mozambique, Bahamas, Jamaica, Mexico, Chile, Colombia, the list goes on and on, Florida, California, Tahiti, right? You are changing the world. New innovations will continue to emerge from your communities and sectors, disciplines, and government, and that'll teach us all. And you, by your example, will continue to move that knowledge forward. We are part of a genealogy, and your knowledge, if done right, and the work that you do, and if with intentionality, will pass forward to the next generations. So thank you for what you're doing. So in closing, as future ancestors, how did we fare in the face of a confluence of crises? How curious were we to explore, and how hard did we work to find answers to seemingly intractable challenges? Did we lead with courage, the kind that future generations deserve? Or did we accept less of what's worthy of future generations and the planet? For me, these are the underlying questions before us as people who care about, study, and set policy for the ocean, and who also take great benefit, each one of us do each and every day, from what the ocean provides us. I hope that these kind of questions are what's going to be in the front of our minds here as we exchange and share information, as we learn and come together here, and as we design those necessary solutions to the challenges that we face. Let's be good ancestors. Let's make the most of our time here, maximize being in person, don't do things that we could have done by Zoom. And then when we leave here, can we put that to work? Can we not go back to the rest of the stuff the way things were? Can we please? Because that's going to be the true measure of the success of this Congress. Thank you again for this incredible opportunity. Brevity is not my strong suit. To be here with all of you. E ulu i ka lani, e ulu i ka honua, e ulu i ka moana nui a kea. Aloha.
Apa amakai tu kai te